Bilinguals of Reddit, what's your funniest story of people not knowing you speak their language? Most people don't realize that I speak Spanish fluently. I was in Mexico with my husband on vacation. We went to a restaurant. They gave us a menu with a side in English facing up. I flipped it over, and the exact same menu was printed on the back in Spanish, except the prices were about half that of the English version. I ordered our meals in Spanish just in case it counted towards the discount. I, an Englishman, work in a bar in the south of France. We get a lot of tourists who naturally can't speak a word of French, so a lot speak English as their go-to language regardless of their country of origin. Maybe 2 months ago I had an English lady order at the bar, which was quiet at the time, for a big bottle of water. Pretty standard request, except we only sell bottles of water up to 50 cl or alternatively offer tap water for free. After offering her either of these options in perfect English because it now, in English, she proceeded with the stereotypical raise of voice, slow talking and speaking with her hands charade. Big gestures with her hands the size of big bottle proceeds to pretend to unscrew a cap off a bottle water here air drinks through her imaginary bottle of water. So I gave her a shot of gin instead. Her husband found it hilarious. He also recognized immediately I was from the UK, but let her play it out. Maybe not haha funny, more of a OMG we are so ducking dumb sometimes moment. Kind of the other way. When I was younger my family and I German went to Greece, and in a store, my grandpa started talking about how expensive that stuff there was, and how cheap it looked. Then my mom found something she liked, and the store owner came over to help her, in German. Some Japanese cashiers had a conversation deciding if my wife's red hair was natural. As we walked away I told them it was dyed, but not to tell my wife that I know. Opposite of topic, I'm by no means a fluent ASL signer. But once my local bar tried to introduce me to a deaf old man. I started with a simple "How are you?" nothing in response. I figured he didn't want to talk. I simply signed, "Have a nice night," absolutely nothing in response. Come to find out, dude is not deaf. Doesn't know a leg of sign. Just does it to get attention and drinks. Schmuck. I'm not bilingual, but can understand quite a bit of Spanish, and speak a limited amount. I was at a quinceañera with a friend, and was having a really bad anxiety day. One of the middle-aged men sitting at the same table as us was outright talking about me in Spanish, saying I had crazy eyes, and how there was something wrong with me. My friend told him I could understand him, and he just went quiet. I was shopping, and 2 people approached me and asked if the store had ice cream packages in English. I guided them to it as I was heading there myself. Once they got it, they instantly started talking Swedish extremely poorly. Swedish is my native language, and said how impolite I had been for not simply telling them, and had felt like I was forced to lead them there. I replied in Swedish I was heading here myself, so why the hell would I simply tell you where it is? Both turned pale, grabbed the ice cream and hurried off. And yes, this was in Sweden. There's literally no reason for them to assume I'd not speak Swedish. Was at a market in Thailand. Just as the stall owner is handing me my purchase, a tourist walks up and starts randomly educating me on bartering. I'd never met this person before, but they insist on showing me how it's done. So he's bargaining away and drives the owner down to about half price. With a smug look, he says, and that's how it's done. I didn't have the heart to tell him I paid a 1/10 of what he did, just by speaking politely using rudimentary Thai. My wife Norwegian speaks 6-7-11 languages at varying levels of proficiency, and have a few good stories. Best ones from her time studying in Prague. She went out with some Czech friends, all girls. They ended up in a bar, at a table next to a group of Norwegian guys that were on a weekend party trip. The guys were somewhat drunk, and of course immediately started flirting with my wife and her friends, in the typical heavily accented English spoken by Norwegians. While flirting, they discussed among themselves the various physical attributes of each girl, how slutty they were, how they'd perform in bed, what they'd do to them later that night in graphical detail, IMSO getting laid comments, and so on. My wife translated everything into Czech for her friends. A lot of fun was had at both tables. The Czechs got more and more flirty as the Norwegians bought drinks, got bolder and became more and more certain they'd all actually get laid. After several hours, when the girls decided rather abruptly to end the evening, the Norwegian guys were a bit confused as the girls all got so cold so quickly. Then my wife said, in Norwegian, "Nice meeting you guys, good luck," watched them all turn blood red, and left. My friend's son knows fluent Spanish, but is white, so when he brought his wife's minivan in to get it detailed, the people cleaning it were all going on and on about how stupid and dirty this guy is and how he should make his kids clean the van instead. Then they went on about how cheap Americans are and they probably wouldn't even get a tip for all the hard work. When they were done, he went right over to thank them and let them know how much he appreciated the job they did and gave them a tip. All in Spanish, so they knew he had heard every word they said. Edit. I probably should have mentioned that this was in Mexico right near the US border, so being white and a Spanish speaker was more unusual. I mean, I live in Canada and am half French Canadian, so lots, but the best was kinda the reverse. My dad yelled out to me in the middle of a crowded grocery store that he was bleeding from my asshole and have to go to the bathroom in French, thinking no one would understand. Like, 3 people turned around with horrified WTF faces as he walked away. I just shrugged. What can you do? Guy has hemorrhoids and no sense of shame. Not my fault. Now we all have to live with this image. My family is Greek, however I have an aunt that lives in Germany. She was visiting Greece one time, and she went to the jewelry store with her husband, where they both spoke to the staff in English. They were looking at rings when my aunt wiped her nose in a tissue. One of the girls working there thought she was trying to steal a ring and tells the other girl working there, "I think she just put a ring in her tissue. Keep an eye on her." My aunt turns to her and goes, "I blew my nose. Would you want me to show you my budgers?" I was in a bus and a tourist couple was pretty much next to me talking about finding a hotel to have sex that night. The girl told him to stop saying that because someone might hear it. The guy replied, "They don't understand English, babe." Well, I sure did. Mine is more wholesome. I worked at a department store and this one shift I encountered a sweet but confused old man with a strong French accent trying to ask me a question in English. I just asked if it would be easier for me to speak French, in French of course, and he smiled very wide. Most people in our area only speak English, so he was glad someone was able to help him in his native language. Was at the theater waiting for the play to begin in my city Sao Paulo, Brazil, and those teenage girls next to us were making fun of everyone around them in French. I was quiet until they started to talk about my mother. They were talking about nothing much, just her general appearance, but in an unflattering way. My mom speaks no French, but I do. A broken French, but I do. She got really confused when I turned to her and said, loud and clear, "Sets files croy and QUI person lissa comprise canards." Which means these girls believe that no one can understand them. Idiots. They went blue, purple, red. They were not French, but they were smartasses who thought they were the only people in Sao Paulo that spoke French. And nobody messes with my mama. Spanish speaker here. Was with my family ordering food at a Mexican restaurant, and the waiter in training was telling his senior that he was worried that his English wasn't good enough and he wasn't ready to try. I told him not to worry. I spoke Spanish and would help translate for my monolingual mother. He got excited and thanked me. I ended up chatting with him for a while and told him to not get discouraged. If I could learn Spanish in Mexico, he could learn English in the US and people would be more willing to help than he might think. Negotiating with vendors in Turkey as they babbled amongst each other trying to rip me off. It'd make a super lowball offer in Turkish. The look on their faces was gold, and this happened oft. Usually I got the dealers, they were super embarrassed. American who lived there 2 years, took Turkish 101 and 102 classes when I arrived. My boyfriend and I went to Japan and stood out like the pair of hugely tall white folk we are. Literally no one expects foreigners to speak Japanese here, BTW. when just hanging out waiting to cross a street, a kid holding his mum's hand just stared at my 6-foot+ boyfriend and said to his mum, "Wow, foreigners are amazing, aren't they?" We nearly died of laughter later, but there are tons of encounters like this. I only scare the pants off some of them though. Great fun. I'm mixed ethnicity and apparently I can pass for a Japanese person. While living in Japan, I was helping a Caucasian friend teach an English class. A couple of students entered the classroom and I greeted them by saying good evening, welcome to class or something brief and simple like that. Despite being a single sentence, their jaws almost dropped and they both said, "Wow, your English is good." I laughed and had to explain to them that I was a 4th-generation Japanese American, born and raised in Hawaii. English was my native language. There was a Polish barista in the coffee shop near work in London. I always asked in Polish for coffees and said thank you, but she kind of ignored it. Once she said dismissively, "Everybody in England knows simple Polish phrases." So I used my best colloquial Polish, which is my first language, to tell her she had a beautiful name and ask about where she came from. /0 never seen someone blush hard enough to match their dyed red hair. The staff at a Korean restaurant I frequented always used to yell, "Your white girlfriend is here," in Korean to the head waiter when I walked in, because he was the only person on staff who had some English and always served my table. One time he good-naturedly told the other staff, after they said it, that I couldn't be his girlfriend because he was too short compared to me. I took a leap and told him in Korean that I was wearing heels right now, but would be happy to wear flats on a date. We ended up dating for over a year before he had to go back to Korea to take care of his dad. He was the loveliest guy. In Norwegian, but was in vacation in London, was on the way out the subway and waiting for a lift. Standing with my girlfriend, we overhear two girls behind me talking about me in Swedish that I understood and how hot I was and that they would definitely be down to duck if I asked, and how my girlfriend was not in my league and that I did not know how hot I was. When the lift arrived, I turned around and thanked them in Norwegian for the compliments, but that my girlfriend was far better looking than both of them. They decide to not get on the lift with us. Old Japanese lady here in Brazil was selling yakisoba at the farmer's market and talking in very broken Portuguese with a heavy Japanese accent. I start talking in Japanese and she suddenly is super impressed. I got so much extra stuff on top of my yakisoba. I'm bilingual, but this story is of my grandma's. When she had first arrived in Toronto, she had made a couple of friends in the area and they had decided to go watch a Bollywood movie together. They went to the nearby theater and were in line when one of my grandma's friends noticed an Asian family, Chinese, Japanese, etc., and started making small little comments toward the friends group like, "What the hell are they doing here? They don't even understand blah blah." The movie ends, and when they're leaving, my grandma's friend made one more comment toward the Asian family, and the guy turned around and said, "FCKU, and your family beach. I know your language and I've been listening since you walked in." My grandma's friend left the theater and learned her lesson. Kind of along similar lines. I have a friend from Egypt. She and a friend were being driven to the bank by her friend's friend who she didn't know. The driver then starts going on a tirade about Arabs and Muslims being terrorists and destroying the world to her, and she just nodded along like she agreed. When she left the car, she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm Arab from Egypt." She said she's never seen someone so horrified, and that all he managed to get out was that he thought she was Hispanic. I speak French. Being in Paris was wild. As an American, it felt like I had these experiences on a daily basis. People just assumed I was a moron and couldn't possibly speak French or understand them. The worst one was when the friend I was visiting brought me to a party, and after what I thought was a really boring convo in poor English with the host, at this point I just went with whatever language someone started speaking to me. My friend came over and the host started telling him in French that I seemed really uncool and stupid, and so I was like, "Look, your English sucks," which was true. Anyway, she tried apologizing, and this clearly made me like cooler. I dunno. It was really pretty snotty and there was really no recovering from that for either one of us, so I left. Yeah, the worst part is that I'm French American / French Canadian, so I'm just like word. Worst mother culture ever.
N.